Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce the two highly creative and wonderful people who are on our panel. The first is Paige Parsons, who is a phenomenal photographer. Her work is seen everywhere, and you will see much of her photos rolling in the back. And without me having to explain how wonderful they are, you will see them. The second person is Jessica Williams. Jessica Williams actually works for us at the Schwab Learning Center, but she's also a professional opera singer. Both Jessica and Paige live with dyslexia and are highly creative people. Larry's going to talk to them and ask them questions about their lived experiences with creativity and dyslexia. You'll also see pictures of Jessica scrolling in the back, and these will go on the whole time during the panel. We did have a clip of Jessica singing that we wanted you to hear. If we get a chance in between, we will play it for you, but it was going to be challenging to navigate the technology in between. So without another second, go ahead.
Thank you, Nicole. Great, so we talked a little bit over the last few weeks, We exchanged through email a little bit over the last few weeks and all agreed that rather than me specifically directing the conversation, we really want to have a conversation up here. And one of the things I want to acknowledge is that, as Nicole said, both of the panelists have dyslexia, but what was so interesting to me about this morning is that, what does that mean? Like, there's such a range of neurodiversity within that. So the place I thought that might be helpful to start is for you to get a sense from each of them about who they are and where dyslexia has fit in. And what I'd love for you to do, and if we could start with you, Jessica, is to talk about that a little, but also I wonder if you had to give a headline to your experience so far with dyslexia in your career and education and so on, what would that be, and what is the story that comes behind that?
I would say it's uncharted territory. I'm coming up on 28 years of life, and the past almost 2 years that I've been working for the Schwab Learning Center, I'm just now starting to understand what I've been going through. I've never before have had the opportunity to sit in front of someone and say, this is why you're experiencing this, and this is why it takes 5 minutes to write the word pencil. I was diagnosed with learning disability and dyslexia in 4th grade, and then was shoved into various classes with multiple teachers and not understanding why. I understood that I didn't understand what the teacher was saying. I understood that sometimes I did and then sometimes I didn't. I understood it took me a very long time to understand anything, but had no idea as to why. I had other students that were in my classes too, but had no idea if they were going through the same things that I was going through. That's elementary school, middle school, high school, college as well. College is when I started to use my music and my passion in helping my education and figuring out, oh wait, I understand this, not in the same way that everyone else does, but I realized that I have a good ear, that I listen. And listening was the best way for me to understand information. Writing absolutely is not. So I stopped writing and I started listening, and that is when I was able to understand information and process it a little bit better. Not faster, but better. But I'm still on this road to understanding what is it that I face every day when I read something or write an email or learn something new, and why it takes me so long to understand it. But within that, I know what I have to go through to process information, to understand it, to eventually get it. It takes a while, it's different, but I've overcome and done it.
Yeah. Thank you. Paige, can I have you answer the same question, just to help pull out your story, but if you had to give it a headline?
I think I don't have to do a resume nowadays because I've got pictures instead, but it used to be when I had a resume and I had a cover letter, the first line was, I thrive on a challenge. And I think I'm just one of those people that like, put me in the middle of chaos and I'm pretty happy because I'm kind of confused and a little ditzy anyway, you know? And I can, you know, I tend to pick up on things that people don't. I can pivot on a dime, you know, tell me to do something completely the opposite of the way I was doing it yesterday. It's, okay, sounds like fun, you know? And I didn't know I was dyslexic until I had children myself. So, in fact, I was tested when I was younger, and my parents were told that I was gifted. And so everybody just sort of looked at me really strangely, you know, like, well, why can't she spell? You know, why is her writing so bad? Like, gosh, she must be awful lazy. She's not living up to her potential. You know, I was really lucky that I had a mom that was an administrative assistant and that would often type up some of my essays for me in high school and correct some of my spelling. I'm very, very thankful for that because I don't know what would have happened to me otherwise. My parents certainly believed in me, but they just thought I was, you know, just a little, I don't know, off. But, you know, pretty positive, and my heart was usually in it with whatever I was doing, and I hadn't really ever studied. When I got to college, it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I mean, I almost failed out my freshman year, and I thought, oh, like, I think I better change course. I thought that I wanted to be an industrial engineer. I was at MIT. I think about half the people that are there are dyslexic from what I understand, but there was no support. I mean, nobody came to me and said, hey, these are some pretty common problems. Had you ever thought about going to a recitation? They're really important. Or having a study buddy or anything like that. And so I gravitated towards art and design, but I was pretty fortunate in that I was in a place where I couldn't help but have some exposure to technology. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to sort of take both of those things and combine them. And it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do, what my calling was. And I used to do interaction design for a while, but it just didn't really check all the boxes for me. And anytime I had to fill out an expense report or write a note by hand, it was terrifying. You know, even now, like, I've got to think if I've got to write a note by hand and I don't have access to technology, what words am I going to use that I know how to spell?
Yeah. Always.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear you both reference back to a very early age. So in your case, Paige, you were not diagnosed as dyslexic, but as gifted. Mm-hmm. And in your case, the diagnosis was dyslexia, but then it was like fend for yourself, in essence. So I would love for each of you to expand on those two very distinct experiences. So Paige, in your case, do you feel that the designation of being gifted played any positive role? Did it contribute to your feeling like you thrive on a challenge, or was it irrelevant?
I think it probably was positive. I had a very unusual childhood in that we moved all around, all across the country. So I was never really in a school for more than a year. And it wasn't just like moving school to school locally, you know, like St. Louis and Denver and Southern California, Northern California. So I think I was diagnosed around the time I was in third grade maybe or something like that. So in some ways it was helpful that, like, even though I couldn't spell and write long things, like, somebody thought that I had some potential,
Yeah.
you know? And I wasn't always with all the same peers, and there were some things that I did all right. I didn't have any early reading challenges, I think because I was so visually strong, I could sight read, and I just sort of skipped over the phonetics kind of stuff. So I guess in some ways having that label helped some, but in other ways it was really hard because I just felt like I was always letting everybody down.
Yeah. Well, part of the reason I asked is I was thinking about Dr. Fung's, positive psychology comments earlier, and even a single word like gifted that comes with these connotations of being special, even if you moved from school to school and it didn't materialize as you get a special class or whatever it might be, can be a turning point in your own thinking about. Now they're throwing you to the sharks, but at least you go in with a positive tune. But in your case, Jessica, did you feel when you were told you had dyslexia, did you feel a negative coming at you? I think you also mentioned that you were put in a different class or group, and I may have misunderstood that, but can you talk about that?
I was always taken out of the classroom for reading and math. And in those classrooms were about 10 to 12, in high school maybe 15 students, and they always had multiple teachers in them. But that's really all I knew, is that, oh, Jessica, at this time you have to leave the classroom and go to this classroom instead. It wasn't, after my diagnosis, my parents went through a lot. The school wanted to put me in special education classes, and diagnosis of learning disabled and dyslexia. My parents fought tooth and nail for that to not happen, but these different kind of classes where I had extra support in them is what I went through elementary school until graduation of high school, is what I remember. But again, never understanding really why, just because I knew I needed the extra help, so that's why I was in this class. Not really sitting around. I mean, it would have been great if, everyone in this class, we sat down and said, hey, what are you experiencing when you look at this math equation? And I'd been like, wait, me too.
Yeah.
That's great. Not just like, hey, Robert, it's nice to see you again in class, that we have multiple teachers in.
So Jessica works a lot with kids, and I'm wondering if you can flip this coin and talk about how everything you just shared with us impacts how you interact with the kids you've worked with in different...
Absolutely, yeah. Before I moved to California, I worked in 2 nonprofits with younger children, and the second one was in a charter school, and I worked a lot with 6-year-olds, so it was first grade. And when they were going through their homework, it was super, super scary for me to help any child with their homework. But if anything, I wanted to help them with their confidence in getting into, oh, this is frustrating, I don't understand, why don't I understand this? And getting them to a place where they felt confident to, one, ask their teacher and tell their teacher that they didn't understand what was going on. I think that was the most important thing. If I couldn't help them in what they were learning at the time, I could at least say, well, don't just shy away and say you just don't get it and walk away. Go and tell somebody. Tell someone that you don't understand. Let's bring this other person over because I just heard them struggling too. Let's work on this together and see if we can figure it out together, as opposed to just being on an island by yourself.
Paige, one of the things she shared with me was that I think just in the last 6 years, you've been, was it just 6 years ago that you were actually diagnosed with dyslexia? But the thing I'm remembering is you've had a lot more interaction with other dyslexics. And I wonder if, similar to what I was asking Jessica, how do you take what you experienced and what you learned, and what do you convey to others if you find yourself in that role?
So it wasn't until my daughter was diagnosed, which I think was in about 3rd or 4th grade, which would have been 2001, so it's been about 16 years, not 6 years, but it actually wasn't, I don't think I knowingly had met another adult dyslexic until I went to the ID's dyslexia leadership symposium. And for the first 6 or 7 hours I was there, I just kind of looked around. I mean, it was just, it really changed me. I mean, and it even affected my identity, just because I mean, in some ways positive, in some ways negative, but I had just always been me and this one lone person in this way. And to be in another room where and I'd seen other children, but that was kind of different, to be with other adults that I had struggled in the same way that I had, and that might have the same quirks or couldn't spell things, And
there's so many similarities, which is so beautiful. It's like, it's not just me.
I know, it was, at first, like, it challenged my identity for the first couple, and then it was like, I just sort of like gave into it, and it was like, this is great, like, this is awesome. And I've got to say, ever since then, I really try whenever I'm meeting just about anybody, or anytime I can put it in, and I'm dyslexic, Just last night I was shooting metric up at the Masonic, and there's this time in between bands, and so the photographers always chat. And I was chatting with a guy who works for me as a photographer, and I've known for, at least 6, 7 years, and I mentioned, I'm speaking at a dyslexia conference tomorrow, and he's like, you're dyslexic? And just watching his face, as I told him, and you could tell, it just kind of blew his mind, and like, I thought you were a smart person, I had all these assumptions about you, and well, do you flip letters? And it was really clear just in that moment, one, he didn't really understand what dyslexia was, and this was a teachable moment, and so I really tried to be open and to explain as best I could, and to tell him about not only, some of the things that are a challenge for me, like time and transposing numbers and letters, but that all these things that are a strength, and that this is why me as who I am and what I do. It's my dyslexia that lets me do all these wonderful things.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I can't remember exactly how Nicole phrased it. It's not as though, this is just great fortune shining down upon you, and yet, it sounds like in those situations, it's almost the badge of honor to say, well, look, you've already appreciated all these things about me, guess where some of their roots are. There's a tremendous amount of finding self-confidence in what you all have described, and I'm curious. So there have been specific things for each of you, so photography or singing. Can you talk a little bit about those specific passions of yours and how you've used that to both deal with some of the challenges, but also channel some of the strengths? Do you want to start, Jessica?
Sure. Definitely in music, it's my ear. Reading music is a constant challenge, but the minute I hear something, I can repeat it pretty much right away. I have a very, very strong ear, and that's what I started using as my strengths when learning music, understanding music, because in the classroom I was just like, okay, you can keep talking, and I'm not gonna understand it. But when again, like I said, I stopped writing and just listening, I was able to understand it a little bit better. Another one of my passions and why I work at the Schwab Learning Center is administrative work. I find it challenging in itself, but I also find it just so exciting to plan and organize and break things down, to very minute points. And organizing is one of my favorite passions of all. It's just really, really fun for me, and scheduling and planning, and my friends think I'm crazy because I will plan down to the millisecond if we're just going to the store.
I don't think your friends would say, are you a freak?
Yeah, pretty much.
Help me get my act together?
Yeah, pretty much. It was. It's always been, kind of those things. But I've used all of that in, kind of all the work that I've done, and whether it's nonprofit work or organizing events, or just managing a desk job to getting ready to do a performance, have just been some of my strengths that I've used, and focusing on that and kind of perfecting those strengths to the best of my ability. I mean, being an opera singer, you're entitled to be a perfectionist. Everything has to be perfect. So even if I don't reach that level of perfection, I challenge myself to work as best as I can to get to that place where I feel like I've done everything I could to make this as perfect is such a hard word, but it's a word in my head, as perfect and polished as possible. And that's what I always strive for in everything I do. And if I don't understand it right away, I take the time to break it down, organize it in my head, and take it on from there.
Yeah, I love this description for two reasons. One is another slide in Dr. Fung's presentation was on Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. I had the privilege of interviewing Howard too for my second book, and it was interesting as those intelligence went up, I counted them. Because when I interviewed Howard, they were up to 8. There were 7 on that slide. They were up to 8, and he said, we're working on 4 more. And we really think that these are just as strong, but we want the data to be there. So it's so interesting to hear across those call it 12, those possible 12, where people dial in. So I'm thinking that this leads to the second reason why this is so interesting. You were talking about how you love the organizing, the administrative.
Yeah.
I got a different sense when we talked, Paige, when you said, I really like being on the fly and not necessarily having to be totally scripted for something. So if that's true, can you elaborate on that, but also talk about photography and how that's played a role specifically for you?
Sure, I want you to come and help manage my life.
That's what I thought too. At the same
It's really
time.
crazy. I think of literally everything.
My husband has a formula for me, like when I give him, when are you gonna be home, or how long is that gonna take? And I think it's something like 5/3 whatever number I give him plus 15 minutes. And he's a computer scientist, and I think he actually graphed me out for a year to come up with that plot, and it's annoyingly accurate. So
I hope you're going to share that formula with all of us. Yeah, I have a wife who has incredible talents, but she will be late to her own funeral. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, the irony is, for me in my work with live photography, it's pushed me up against that. Because when you do live concert photography, the general rule is first 3 songs, no flash. And I mean, that's it. Like, if I'm there late, I'm there late, and I've missed it. Like, I literally only have 15 minutes to shoot, and I'm usually coming from Palo Alto to San Francisco, so I've gotten on my A game, at least with Waze and planning. They kind of joke, oh, Paige is here, the show can go on, because I'm usually there about 30 seconds before the band, but one of the things, though, that I think one of my, I guess 2 things that I'll mention about, I guess, continuing on with that time thing, I'm really lucky, and anybody that employs people or that you have a chance to make differences in terms of what people are doing, I'm really lucky that some of my bosses, I work for a lot of different people, but like the people at the Outside Lands Music Festival, for example, Another Planet Entertainment, they know this about me, and that I can stay on a schedule if I really need to, but if you put me on that kind of schedule, I'm just completely focused on the time, and I can't be in the moment, I can't pivot like I was talking about. And instead of telling me you're gonna shoot this band here and that band there, that they just say, go at it, Paige. Mm-hmm. Like, we trust you. We know you're gonna get what needs to be gotten, and you'll get a few extra things if we just say, go out for the day and roam. And so I'm very thankful to have people that appreciate my strengths in that way, and they see the benefits of it. And I guess the other thing that I'll add is that I think that my photography, the early seeds of it really came from the fact that I have really, really poor working memory, and my memory is just not great. And so that was what motivated me to go out and photograph to begin with, because there's just all these things that I want to remember, I don't want to forget. Particularly, with my kids when they were little, I have the wrinkle of a finger or a muddy little toe, or, And even when I shoot now, for rock and roll, most people don't see it, but I have pictures of everybody's shoes. Like, I think it says a lot about how people position their feet and other things that people aren't normally looking at. And so I think the fact that I can see both the big picture, you know, and put all these things that are pretty disparate together to create a story, and to help myself and others remember and get the salient points, I think those all are gifts of my dyslexia.
Thank you. So I don't know if you saw on the agenda, this was titled the Creative Arts Panel. And one of the things that I found and continue to find so incredibly frustrating in studying and talking about creativity is the belief that creativity only exists in the arts. And it comes with this raft of other assumptions about the arts, and they tend to be, you know, how wonderful it is to work there. And yet the MacArthur Fellows that I spoke with that worked in the arts had a very different story to tell. So since we have two people who live part or whole time in the creative arts, I'd be curious if you could talk about how that community either is more embracing or understanding or can relate to some of the things that come from your dyslexia, or how that might be a false image.
Absolutely not. It's the opera world. No.
Describe that it's the opera world, and what does that mean exactly?
There's just, I mean, there's accuracy, there's precision. Like I said, it's that level of perfectionism and beauty that has to come at the end result of it. There really isn't time for mess ups. There isn't time for, oops, I didn't understand that. If you did say that, you may get a frown. So there really isn't a lot of time for that. So I think, you know, growing up and learning and studying opera, I have adapted to, I guess that's kind of where a lot of my planning comes from, is giving myself the time to process the information so that when I go into that rehearsal hall, when I go onto that stage, I can be at the level of professionalism that they want me to be at. It's making sure that I have enough time to get to that level where I have to be, because if I'm not, I can easily be cut and fired right away.
Yeah. What has your experience been like, Paige?
I think it's similar. I think in some ways, perhaps the artistic world is a little easier in the sense that I think that you can bring more of your whole self. And so in that way that you can be a little bit more you in that sense, that you don't have to be in this small little cookie cutter of, you know, it's often your differences that set you apart. But I've got to agree that, like, you know, especially behind the scenes, like I said, I've got to be there. Like, I can't be 2 minutes off. And not only that, but I've got to know exactly where I'm allowed to be. I've got to work, you know, I've got to work with all these other people that are behind the scenes, you know, the lighting people, the PR people. I've got to get agreements signed for a band. I've got, you know, there's, and even after I come home and I've got to manage my time with editing and getting pictures up on time and getting naming correct and have a backup strategy, and have, you know, there's so much more than, it's just sort of the tip of the iceberg, I think, probably for you with the singing and for me with the finished photograph that you see, but it's just all of this other work that requires all these skills that don't always come that easily to me.
Absolutely, yeah.
I appreciate you both sharing that. I just continue to find it fascinating that, so if you're somebody who's not in the arts could be something you think is a place you can escape to, where you're better understood, or it's more appreciated that you think in a different way. And my experience, personal and with the people that I've interviewed, is that, you know, we're all just humans, and we develop our own rigidity in whatever area it is. One of the MacArthur Fellows I interviewed, the choreographer Liz Lerman, said it was a shock to her when she went into dance to realize that there was high art and low art, and that the whole system was built around that, rather than, as she calls it, she wanted to hike the horizontal. She wanted to go between all the different zones and just see what she could learn, but she had to break out to do that on her own and find her own path. There wasn't some, you know, automatic supportive community that went into that. And so these personal traits and the confidence to be able to figure out which ones you can lean on, I think is pretty important. So in entrepreneurship, and I've researched this a lot, it's kind of like the creative thing and the big breakthrough ideas. It's never just one person, it's never just one idea. So in entrepreneurship, I think about the entrepreneurial ecosystem, all the different parts and pieces and places that help you then leverage what you realize you love or what your strengths are. And I would love for you all to talk about your version of that, if you've experienced that. And Paige, can we start with you?
Sure. It's so true. I mean, it's not about being a lone wolf. It's working together with lots and lots and lots of people behind the scenes. And you don't have to, but I think in order to be successful and get where you want to go, you really need to. I was fortunate enough to be asked to have my work presented in an international photography magazine in the past 10 days. And they were like, surprise, there's a week deadline and we need a 2,500 word essay on. And I was like, oh my goodness.
Can it all be the same word?
My usual line is a picture's worth 1,000 words. Can't I just give you 2.5 pictures? But they weren't going for that. But I called on my best friend since high school, my friend Phil. And I said, Phil, you know, you've helped me write my bio before. When I had my first solo show, you helped me write my artist statement. You know, will you write an essay on me? I'll even pay you to, to do so. And, he was very gung-ho about it. This is the same person that 2 weeks beforehand, we have a group photo show that goes on, and somehow I often do the design the card for it, but with my dyslexia, I'm super afraid that I'm gonna misspell a word or something like that. So I have there's a whole number of people, including my husband, who generally help out with that, but Phil did the design for that. I've got I've got other people that help me to go through and edit images and bounce ideas off of, and I have different managers with each person that I work with that arranges for each one of my photo passes. I mean, if I think about the number of people that are involved and that I have to be that I get to be grateful to work with, I'm just so thankful, because it is just this big ecosystem, and I'm not at the top of it. I'm just in the web of all these people doing all these wonderful things, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
It almost sounds like multiple overlapping ecosystems, which is also a very common occurrence among entrepreneurs that aren't just successful like in delivering their big idea that they're known for, but continuing to be able to evolve and create new forms of value, that they find themselves really crossing across multiple ecosystems. Jessica, sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. I would say my biggest support system has been my family. My parents have, always fought for me. My mom writes everything for me. I always say, Mom, I have, this long email I need to write. This is what I'm thinking about, and she'll draft it, and she's like, you can, edit it here and there. I'm like, thank you so much. Because it just takes me so long to do it. My dad has just been a fighter for me. My brother is a sophomore at Harvard in electrical engineering, so anything math related, I'm like, RJ, I need your help. My sister is the complete opposite of me, not a planner, super laid back, so anytime I'm like in my head, she's like, dude, you gotta chill, you gotta calm down, breathe, it's gonna be okay, this is how you break it down. She's a project manager in IT. But yeah, my parents have just been, solid rocks for me throughout my whole process of learning. I remember in middle school, I made honor roll, which was like never thought that was gonna happen to me before. And I, had the certificate, and I brought it home to my dad, and he was like, "Oh, we're gonna give this to your mom for Christmas." And so he put it on a plaque, and she gave it to her, and on video camera, she opened it up, and he wrapped it in a diaper, which is a random thing. But she started crying in the corner, and she was just like, "They said she couldn't do it. They said she couldn't do it. They said she couldn't do it." And we'd laugh about it all the time, but when I graduated from my master's, on my cap, I put, "They said she couldn't do it."
Nice.
And I gave it to my parents. I gave that to my parents after I graduated my master's, and I said, guys, you have been there the entire time to help me get through this, and I thank them so much every single day.
Yeah.
Oof. Yeah.
That's wonderful. So I'm going to ask you a curious question. If either of you could wave a magic wand and have your dyslexia go away, would you? And no matter what the answer, if the answer is yes, what would you miss?
Oh, hell to the no, period.
All right, there we go.
Like, no.
I wish I had a mic.
I would say no. I would say it has been challenging, yes, but I don't think it has truly, personally, emotionally tainted me to the point where I'm like, I never want this to ever happen again. There have been hard times, absolutely. There have been challenging times on my insecurities and who I am as a person and where I'm gonna go in the future. But I've had support when I knew to seek it. And in my own self, I've, just gone out and figured it out. If I don't understand it, it's like, well, get up and figure it out. And if it takes me a long time, I know the people I can reach out to help me understand it a little bit better. So even through the challenges, even through the hard times, it's made me who I am. Why would I change me?
Yeah, fair enough. If you could wave that same magic wand and change the circumstances of the environment for all dyslexics, what would you change first? Like whether that's giving a resource to dyslexics that you didn't have, or it's an insight that you didn't have that came later, what would stand out as most important?
I would absolutely say making sure, once people have a diagnosis or are starting to experience challenges, to have someone help them understand what they're going through. That was the biggest negative effect for me, is, given a diagnosis and just kind of having to go out there, that was, kind of the biggest challenge in not understanding why I'm not understanding something, or why I'm in a class with a bunch of other people and multiple teachers staring at me, asking me if I need help, with not really understanding, well, why is that jumbling on the chalkboard? And I don't understand why.
And it sounds like there wasn't even help provided among those kids that you were grouped with, facilitating communication between all of you.
Oh, well, no, we were all focusing on what we were doing, and, one person would have a teacher while the other teacher was helping somebody else, so sometimes it was very quiet in the classroom because we were all individually working on our stuff, and sometimes you would just sit there and say, I'm waiting for this teacher to come over here because I have no idea how to do this on my own. Yeah.
Now you have the magic wand.
Well, I have a little bit of a crystal ball for this because I have 2 dyslexic children.
Okay.
And my daughter was diagnosed when she was in 3rd, 4th grade, and my son, I think, when he was like 4 or something like that. And I had the benefit of going to a school that was very accommodating and open, Peninsula School in Menlo Park, very project-based, a wonderful environment, and yet, I think the number one thing, and I'm not saying I know which way to wave it or what spell to cast, but even though, and having me as a role model and having these traits as well too, like my children didn't feel whole after their diagnosis, no matter how, and they saw in the classroom other children that were excelling in some other ways where they weren't, just especially in those early years. And it just breaks your heart, and I just wish that if I could wave a magic wand, if there's some way for a kid with a learning difference to know that they are whole and they're perfect, just how they are, they're just different. And so that if they could just get a better sense of self in that way to help guide them along through those difficult times, in a school system that could support that, or parents if they don't have parents, but just people that are there to hold space and to let them know that it's all right.
Letting them understand who they are.
Yeah. I think that's important.
So one of the upsides of being the moderator is I get to sit and just absorb all this good stuff, and I can't help but weave your stories together with some of the quotes that Esther put up and the separate experiences of, one student from other students, or student from teacher, whatever it might be. And it's interesting to me, the theme of communication that's come out of this, either the lack of it to you or what you've done in other settings, even what you wished for. So that would be kind of my observation of something we didn't specifically talk about today as a question. Just in closing, is there anything that we didn't talk about that we really should have? You want to start, Jessica?
Not that I know of. It's been a beautiful experience working for the Schwab Learning Center and being able to support the students that we support. And it's helped me become more self-aware, more self-confident, and looking out for more resources to support my own self as well. So I thank the Schwab Learning Center for not just supporting the students, but for supporting me as well, even though I'm a staff member. It's been amazing, and I love working there.
Anything we should have touched on that we didn't?
I don't think, I guess the only thing I can really think of, but I think we've kind of touched on it already, is that, we're talking about neurodiversity here, and I really think of every child as being neurodiverse, in that sense that, we're really fortunate to have an event today where we're talking specifically about dyslexia or ADD, but I spent a lot of time in this progressive school with all these little, wonderful, strange little creatures, and you'd see it with some of the teachers that really could celebrate every single difficult, child. My two were very difficult, but just that if we can think about every child as deserving this, to have the right to be seen exactly for who they are and to have the ability to flourish. I think that's really what we want, and that by doing this and talking and looking specifically at dyslexia, I think somebody else did mention this earlier, that we're really building a world that's going to benefit all children.
Absolutely.
I'll talk to that. So I'll just end by saying, from me personally, but I hope you won't mind my saying from all of you, thank you for doing this. I assume this morning you took note of one of the things Nicole said, but there's been a lot of great information in between, that there were others who were extended the invitation to participate in the day and felt that they couldn't. And the two groups she highlighted that said, I'm not ready to talk publicly about this, were women and women of color in particular. And so there's a lot of confidence on this stage. I know, just being a human being, it's probably not there all the time, but thank you for coming and openly sharing with all of us. I really, really appreciate it.